Hey everybody, welcome to Beaming Notes, and today we're going to look at the summary of the poem The Cold Within by James Patrick Kinney. Setting of the poem. Written in 1960s during African American civil rights movement, this poem depicts the inhuman discrimination that was prevalent at that moment. The poet here tries to depict the folly of the age of falling prey to discrimination of all forms without considering the consequences of the same. Summary, stanza 1. 6 humans trapped by happenstance in bleak and bitter cold. Each one possessed a stick of wood, or so the story is told. The first stanza is the opening of a narration as is recalled by the poet himself. The first line, 6 humans trapped by happenstance, means that the 6 individuals and not a group of 6 people are trapped or stuck at a situation owing to chance, which also means that they are not together out of will, but are brought together by mere fate. Whereas the use of the word trapped signifies that they aren't really happy in this situation. The second line, however, tells us about the weather, which is bleak and bitter cold. In this line, the poet is trying to make his readers familiar with the setting of his narration. The poet further informs his readers that each of these 6 humans possess a stick of wood, or so, as he recalls the story once heard. Hence, the first stanza sets the scene of the narration that is to follow. Summary, stanza 2. Their dying fire in need of logs, the first man held his back. For of the faces round the fire, he noticed one was black. The second stanza is actually the second phase of the narration. It is in this stanza that we get to know the first character of the story. As the first stanza has already made it clear that the story took place in a bitter cold place. Hence, the line, their dying fire in need of logs, further establishes the point that the prospects of the characters in the story aren't really good, as they're all stuck with each other in this cold weather where the only source of heat is a dying fire and is in need of logs. But the first man who has a log which can save the fire from dying held his back, which means he refused to give his log not because he's selfish, but because he's a black man sitting around the fire too. He would struggle rather than save a black man, thus he chose to struggle rather than give his log to the fire, which would have saved him and the black man alike. Summary, stanza 3. The next man looking across the way saw one of his church and couldn't bring himself to give the fire his stick of birch. In this stanza, the poet describes another sort of tension prevailing in the story, which is discrimination based on the religious differences, also known as bigotry. The next man refused to give his log into the fire because he saw a man sitting around who did not belong to his church and as such does not share his religious ideology. This religious difference held his heart from giving his log to the fire, which can save him along with the person who belongs to a different religious group. Summary, stanza 4. The third one sat in tattered clothes. He gave his coat a hitch. Why should his log be put to use to warm the idle rich? In this stanza, the poet introduces a third one who sat in tattered clothes, which meant that this man is poor, and as his clothes are tattered, so he must be struggling more than the others in this cold weather. The poet further described that this third man pulls his cloth closer to his body. He gave his coat a hitch because he was cold and yet refused to give his log to save the dying fire as he didn't want to help the idle rich. In this stanza, the poet showed the discrimination based on the economic standard of different individuals. Summary, stanza 5. The rich man just sat back and thought of the wealth he had in store and how to keep what he had earned from the lazy, shiftless poor. In this stanza, the poet says that while the poor man refused to help this idle rich, the latter isn't really bothered as he's busy calculating as to how to keep what he had earned from the lazy, shiftless poor. By what he had earned, the poet is actually referring to the log that he had with him. The thing to be noted in these two stanzas is that both poor and rich has a prejudice about the other of being idle and lazy. Summary, stanza 6. The black man's face bespoke revenge, as the fire passed from his sight, for all he saw in his stick of wood was a chance to spite the white. This stanza depicts the emotions of hatred and revenge that rises from the discrimination done to him. These strong emotions of revenge turns the poor black man, supposedly a victim, into an abuser who, even after having the resource to save the life of all along with himself, chooses to suffer rather than help a white man. He sees this as an opportunity to spite the white rather than save his life. Thus, the only opportunity that the black man has of saving his life, he wastes it in the quest of taking revenge from the white. Summary, stanza 7. The last man of this forlorn group did not accept for gain. Giving only to those who gave was how he played the game. The second last stanza introduces the last man of the group, who, as a line, did not accept for gain, suggests is a businessman. As such, he will not spend his resources without making sure that he has gained something in return. He was ready to give only to those who gave. Whereas the line was how he played the game suggests that each individual character of the story took the only chance of saving their life as a game in which they are to defeat their enemies even at the cost of their lives. It's important to win and make sure that the opponent suffers rather than save his own life. Summary, stanza 8. Their logs held tight in death-still hands was proof of human sin. They didn't die from the cold without, they died from the cold within. This stanza brings a conclusion to the whole story. Just like the other traditional parable, the concluding stanza of this poem highlights the moral of the whole story and stated the consequences brought by the actions of these characters, who, owing to their prejudices and their ideas of discrimination based on petty differences, went into the arms of death rather than saving their life by saving the lives of others. According to the poet in this stanza, the act of discrimination is the act of human sin, which ultimately leads to death. The last two lines of the poem brings the whole concept of the story narrated, that it is the coldness of heart and lack of human spirit that kills humanity as a whole, and not the cold outside. Central idea. Through this poem, James Patrick Kinney attempts to bring into limelight the futility and shallowness of discrimination, bigotry, and preconceived notions. The intolerance and enmity existing between people is the main reason for the death of the 6 men trapped in the cold. Being biased with racial, religious, and social and economical prejudices, they refuse to help each other. The central idea of the poem revolves around the lack of love, compassion, unity, and understanding in human beings. The cold within us that denies us the warmth of companionship and friendship arises from the illogical and pathetic belief in the concepts of discrimination and prejudice.